Okay, in this tutorial we're going to look at lighting effects, and we're going to start with the same base scene that we started with in the previous tutorial. So you can just re-download that file and open it up. Again, there's a seamless backdrop, there's wine glasses, there's a couple objects, and we're going to leave the objects as they are. If you want to color them different colors or mess with materials, you can go ahead and take a minute to do that. Just for render time, I'm going to make sure that I don't have luminance check marked on anything, so I don't have subsurface scattering on any materials, and I don't have transparency on any materials. And so yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and just maybe quickly color a couple of these objects, just because I can. And I'm just going to render this with the settings I've got currently. Okay, it's really, really flat. There's no lights in the scene. I've got a couple objects with color on them. I might go ahead and make that backdrop the darker gray color. It really, really doesn't matter at this point. But this is what we're going to do. Okay, so lighting effects. So lighting effects are something that allow us to create things like visible light. We can create a foggy kind of effect, and there's several other ways we can use visible light to do different types of effects. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get started with that. Now, one of the things is we're going to start by making visible lights, and we're going to start by using a spotlight as the light we're going to work with, because we haven't really talked about spotlights yet. So let's go ahead and create a spotlight. And when we do that, it starts in the middle of the world, in the middle of the scene, like everything else. And you'll notice that if I zoom out a bit, there's a cone coming and going straight along the z-axis out there. And that is the cone of illumination, right? And so you can see as I'm pulling this further back, the cone is bisecting the plane at a different spot. Right, and so, and so I've got this light, and hold on, right, so it's coming out further from this. So I'm going to go ahead and lift this up a little bit, and then I'm going to rotate this down so we do have some shadows, right? So I'm just going to rotate it so my spotlight is, more or less focused on my scene. And if I click on the light object so I can see that in the Attributes Manager, you'll see that the type is spot, right? And if I render this right now, it's a spotlight. It illuminates that particular place. Now, in the past tutorial, we discussed Falloff. And so let's go ahead and before we do that, let's turn on our shadows. We're going to turn on area shadows, right? So now you can see that we've got some shadowing going on. I'm gonna go in a little bit, right? And you'll see we've got shadows. Things are looking a little bit more natural. This light is really close to our object, so of course the shadows are soft. Let's go to the Details tab real quick. I just want to show you what Falloff looks like with a light that isn't an area light. And so I can come down here to Falloff, and I can go to Inverse Square Physically Accurate again. And when I do that, first, this is significantly brighter. And second, if I rotate my view a bit, you'll see that I have this center point here, which is allowing me to control, brightness. And then this outer ring is controlling the angle of the light, And so I can either control, fall off by dragging this forward and backward. And then I can control the size of my spot. So I can make a really narrow spotlight, where the fall off is somewhere in the middle there. And then I can go ahead and, render this. So, spotlights can be really useful, It's a light that we do tend to see directional lighting quite frequently in all sorts of things. And the fall off it works kind of the same way. Okay, so let's start talking about effects. And in particular, let's talk about visible light. So we're going to click on our General tab again, and you may have already seen that there's this visible light option. If you're using area lights, you cannot create visible light. It doesn't work. What you can do is you could potentially have an area light illuminating your scene, and then have a point source light or one of these other lights working as a visible lighting source, right? So there's three different options. There's visible, which if I go ahead and create visible, you'll notice I've got this additional ring that's popped out of the back end of this cone. And if I go ahead and render this, right, you'll see that now I'm getting what looks like this flat fog that comes and illuminates out through the back of this. And you'll notice that if I rotate my view some, right, that visible light stream continues out to this further point, right? And it doesn't go all the way there. There's a gradient of full intensity to more limited intensity. And you'll notice that it doesn't care that there's any objects in its way, right? It's going to continue to go through objects and behind objects and everything else, right? If I want to adjust the amount of visible light, I can pull this up, right? So the light's impacting that, but this is much smaller. Now, visible light, all it's doing really is just overlaying this gradient, two-dimensional gradient image on top of where that light is, right? So it's not volumetric. It doesn't have any volume to it. It's just visible. Okay, so there is this visibility tab as well, right? And I can either use the fall off or not use the fall off, use edge fall off, not use edge fall off. And so let's go ahead and pull this out. And currently it says, you know, we're using fall off. Let's uncheck use fall off really quick and render this. Right? If I uncheck use fall off, I basically get a full cone of this gradient, right? And it goes all the way to the edges. And there's also the use edge fall off. So you see how that's kind of a soft edge. If I uncheck that, right, I'm going to get a much crisper edge around this. Okay, and I can set, there's some other things I can set. I can set my brightness, right? Is it 100%? Is it, 50% brightness, right? Do I have dust in there? I'm just going to say 100% dust, and we'll see what that looks like, right? I don't know if you can see let's go the brightness to 100, right? It's kind of hard to see, but it basically adds a little bit of graininess to this, right? And just the straight visible light isn't as great as the as working with the volumetric. So let's go ahead and look at the volumetric lighting. All right, so this is visibility. This is the fastest way to work, and this is something where frequently to create an effect like like say an engine, like on the X-Wing we did earlier, to have the engines emitting light, visible light is one of the things that typically gets used. I'm going to turn on use edge fall off. If I check mark colored edge fall off, it will it'll generally, if there's colored fall off on the light, there will be colored fall off there. Something I want you to note is with the dust turned all the way up, watch what happens to where it hits a surface, right? You don't really see a change in the, oh no, maybe that was an artifact. Huh. Yeah, it's just, ideally it's looking a little dustier. Okay. So let's go ahead and change, let's go back, sorry, let's zoom out. And let's rotate this view. Okay, so, right, a lot of times this will be like a plume of, exhaust or something from an engine. So if I was to, say change my color to, something else entirely, right, I can get something that looks like it's, say, an ion. I don't even know if ion engines are colored blue, right? But maybe there's some blue thing that's flying out there, right? So you could have this encapsulated in something else to create this sense of light. Okay, so I'm going to undo changing the color, and then I'm going to go ahead and change the visible light to volumetric. Right, and if I render this, you'll notice some substantial changes. Right, this becomes much more accurate. There are actually the objects are blocking the transmission of that light, right? So I can see the shadow of this object in the fog itself, in the visible light, right? And so when I render this in this direction, you don't really see it, right? It looks pretty similar to the visible light. And if I go and rotate my view here, you'll also notice, right, the only place that any of this light is getting through is underneath, where it's just a sliver shoots under there, right? So if you need something where you want the light, right, if it's just something for a background or whatever, and there's no objects in there, that's fine. But if there's objects in the path that you want to cast shadows through the fog, you need to use volumetric, right? So you can really see those shadows going through this, and you can see that it actually gets hazier further from the camera. It's much more physically accurate. So let's go to, right, if we go to our visibility tab there, again, we can, all of these settings still apply, right? I've created more dust. The brightness is 100%. If I set this to 50% and render this, right, it's going to be more dim. I believe I can set it to 200%, right, to make it feel even thicker and brighter. So then there's some other things I can do to this noise at this point. I can go to this noise tab here, and if I go ahead and say, there's several ways I can add noise to light. Right now, we're just going to say visibility. And so what that does is it takes this smooth fog and it makes it imperfect. You'll notice it's a little bit darker here, but this scale, the visibility scale, is 100 centimeters. Let's go ahead and make this 25 by 25 by 25 and render this. Right, so now I've got significantly more noise in the density of this visible light. There is this illumination scale factor, which again, if you're like, what the heck does that mean? Right, you can always open help and take a look, right? And it says, you know, the illumination scale, right, use the setting to find the size of the noise on lit objects. So let's go ahead and rotate this view. Right, so I've got this noise happening here, but the lighting is still even. And so let's go ahead and change this noise from visibility to illumination. And let's go ahead and go to our general tab and temporarily turn off the visible light. And let's go ahead and render this. And let's bring our, let's make our light a little bit, right? The brightness, I'm basically going to bring the fall off further out so it's a little bit brighter. Right, so it's a little hard to see still. But what's happening is, here, you can kind of see it on this object, right? This isn't the edge of the cone, right? The cone's out here. But what we're getting is we're getting uneven lighting applied to the surface of this object. If I was to switch the seamless backdrop to the white material, it should be a little bit more visible. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to expand this cone. Right, so I'm going to make the, oops, I'm going to undo that. I'm going to make the angle larger so I have a little bit more surface area to look at. Okay, this is much easier to see, right? So there's areas in here which are much darker and areas which are much lighter. Let's go back to our visibility tab. And sorry, let's go back to our noise tab. And you'll see the contrast is set to 100% right now. I'm going to go ahead and make that 200% and render this. And so that way it just makes it, you know, it's a little bit brighter and I can see those variations a little bit more strongly. Right, okay. So let's go ahead and I'm going to set that back to 100%. Velocity is something where this is only matters in animation. Basically, what that means is that it changes over time, right? And you can actually add wind and wind velocity to it as well, right? So that the fog seems to be moving and rolling over time rather than hanging in one place. Brightness, if I set this to, I don't know, 10 instead of 0, right, it's going to brighten up the dark areas. If I set it to -10, right, it's actually going to make all of it a little bit darker. And so you can see that that has really dimmed the illumination. So let's go ahead and go back to our General tab, and let's put our volumetric lighting back on. And then we're going to go to Details. Oops, sorry. We're going to go to Noise. And instead of just illumination, let's do both, right? Illumination and visibility, right? And so now we've got something where, there's this really foggy light that's coming through, and it's causing variations in illumination on all of my surfaces as well, right? Okay, so that is a simple primer on visibility, right? On doing visible noise effects. Now, there's other things that we can do here. So there's other types of noise. There's this hard turbulence, which you can just kind of test and see which one you like better for what you're working on. With my brightness set to -10, that's really pretty harsh, right? So I can pull that out. It's a little bit less intense. If I make that contrast, I don't know, like 80%, right? Things can be a little bit, less intense. But so I've got hard turbulence. I've also got wavy turbulence, right? And so each one of these can create a different effect in the way that the visibility of this light functions. And so I've got those options. I also have, right, we don't really need to talk about shadows. Surface caustics and volume caustics, if I turn those on, it basically amplifies everything. I don't know how else to describe that quickly. Maybe we'll do, a different tutorial about that, or you can just read through the help, and it can kind of talk about what it does, right? It basically creates these highlights in different areas. I don't know how else to describe that, right? But you can see where you get your brightness is not even across the surface, right? So if you need something that the energy's set too high, right? But if you need something where you want more streams of color and things like that, that is a way to get it, is by using caustics. All right, and I turn those on, but with the visibility, with the noise turned on as well, it's a little bit harder to see what's going on. Okay, but so caustics is one option. The lens, so one of the other things we can do is we can add lenses to this. And the best way to show that is to turn this light off entirely. And let's go ahead and just create a point light. I'm going to pull it up so it's in the scene. I'm going to go ahead and give it shadows. We don't need any visibility turned on. If I render this right now, right, I get a lit scene, but I do not get anything else. And so I'm going to go ahead and go back to lens, and I'm going to change my glow to one of these things. I'm going to go ahead and say, oh, I don't know. What do you like? Flashlight? Sure. And you'll see that I've got this thing here, this image here. And so if I render this now, right, I actually get this super cheeseball glow effect that happens on top of my image, right? So anywhere a light is visible from the camera, I'm going to get this effect, right? So flashlight's a little bit silly, but right, sun, right? If you had a scene where you wanted to have this sunlight showing in the background, this is one way that you can do this. All of these things don't impact the color of your image. It's like a post-processing thing. It's like you created a layer in Photoshop that's just a bright yellow circle with some radial stripes coming out of it, and you applied that on top of your image. That's exactly what Cinema4D is doing with all of this, right? So, there's, different things, but right, they're trying to mimic the way a camera picks up an incredibly bright source of light, right? And so there's this aspect ratio as well. If I change that to say 2, what it's going to do is it'll stretch the thing in one direction or another. There's also these reflexes. Again, right, I could put camcorder on here as well. And reflexes are these false images that appear, right? So if I render this, you'll see that the reflex, right, is these different lights and all of that. I'm sure you've seen these effects applied in any scene where it's like 3D rendered of like, outer space, and you want to have the sense that there's an actual camera looking through this, right? And so the reflexes are all of these circles that are being applied, right? And I did camcorder for both of these. If I do high 8, and obviously I can mix and match these. I don't have to do the same ones, but if I did high 8, right, I kind of get that same sense. And so this is a way that you can add these different effects on top of your image. Okay. So there are a couple other things, we haven't really talked about photometrics. And if I go ahead and I'm going to crank the photometrics up. Right, basically this is totally blasted out. So photometrics impact a lot of, sorry, I'm going to go back to 1000. I'm going to render this the way it is and see, right? So photometrics basically increase intensity of your, right, of everything that you're doing with your light. So because this lens is set on here, if I go ahead and go to photometrics and drop this down lower, right, all the lighting in my entire scene is lower, right? So this becomes something that is significantly less intense. One of the things that's nice about photometrics is more if you're animating something, you could start out with like if a light is turning on, right, rather than being on all the time in your animation, you can start your intensity out at 0. And then as that intensity increases over time, then, if you were to keyframe this intensity, then you'd get that like pop of light, right? Or if this was say an outer space scene and, the sun was coming around the edge of the planet, and so then you needed all of these like photometric things to happen and that intensity to suddenly explode as it comes around the corner. Those are the reasons why you would use photometrics. Typically, when you're just modeling and doing static images, there's no need to adjust it unless you really want to blast out lens effects or things like that. Okay, so there's one other thing that we need to talk about. I'm going to turn off photometric intensity. There's one other thing that we need to talk about with regards to lights, or two other things. First, there's this project tab, and this is something where you can basically choose to light or not light an object, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just work with this point light because it renders quickly, and I'm going to rotate my view a little bit, and I'm just going to get in closer. I'm going to render it. All right, so to start with, everything in the scene is being lit. Oh, and I left the lens effects on. Which is kind of hilarious. I'm going to go ahead and make this all inactive real quick. Okay, there we go. All right, so now it's just like your normal bland, boring lighting. So I've got this light on, and what I want to do is I'm going to go to project, and I want to show you one of the things you can do to break physics. Like let's say there's an object that I really don't want this light to light for whatever reason. Maybe I have multiple lights in the scene and this one object is just too bright with this one additional light on it. Or there's some other reason why I might not want something lit as brightly. And so what I can do is I can come down here and I can click on this little arrow, and I can either select the object in my hierarchy, this asteroid, or I can come here and click on it in the scene if it's visible. So if I click on that, now this asteroid is under the exclude mode of this project tab. And if I render this, right, that means that basically this object is not being lit by the light in the scene, right? I can still see some light on here, and honestly, I'm not 100% sure where that light's coming from. I don't know if this material actually has, I don't even know why I can't see that material popping up. Something may just be going, wrong with, no, nothing's going wrong. What's happening is once I click on this arrow, it stays on until I turn it off. Right, so I may have wanted only the asteroid, but if I leave it on, I'm accidentally going to get like other objects in there. To get rid of objects that are in there, I can just select them in this little thing and hit delete, and then they'll be out of there. And so then all I have to do to get out of the selection mode is click on this button again. All right, now I can go down and I can look at this material. I thought I turned off luminance. It must be the reflectance that's catching reflected light from the backdrop is the only thing I can think is why we're getting any light on there whatsoever. Okay, so I'm clicking on this light tab again, right? So the other thing I can do is switch this to include, and what that means is this is the only object that this light is going to illuminate, right? And so now I've got this, and so it's the reflectance, right? So you can see where this object is being reflected in these other objects, but all I'm lighting is this one object, right? And even though I have the rest of the scene in here. And so this can be really useful, right? If you want some like mysterious objects in the background, but you want one well-lit object, or if you just need a little bit more light, like let's say we are, let me get this out of here. Let's say we've got two lights. Oh, currently include has nothing in it, so nothing is being lit. So I'm going to switch that to exclude. I'm going to copy this light. I'm going to paste it, and it's right on top of the other one. I'm just going to move this light over and bring it down. I have no idea why there's that line around there. But so let's say that with this second light, and I'm going to make the color really awful so we know which light is which. So I'm going to make it really yellow. And then I'm going to zoom in again. And I'm going to render this. All right, so let's say that in this scene, I want the primary light to be on everything, but I just needed more light on the underside of this object, right? If I turn this light off and I render this, it's pretty dark under there. I want it to be brighter, but I don't want it to be impacted. I don't want anything else to be impacted in the scene. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that light back on, and maybe I actually just want the intensity of this light to only be like 50% or something. I don't need that much yellow under there, but I need some. And so I've got this light. I am going to turn shadows are on because I copied it. I'm going to go to the project tab, and I'm going to switch to include, and I'm just going to include the asteroid. And I'm going to click on that arrow again, so I'm out of that mode. And so now when I render this, right, everything is normal, but this bottom side here is now more illuminated and it's a yellow light on green, so it's just making that a little bit brighter. All right, so now I've got a more uniformly lit object, but I'm not coloring all of the rest of my scene yellow when I don't want that to happen. Okay, so those are some lighting effects that we can do. Now, there's some more advanced lighting effects, and one of those things is, we haven't really talked about this, but there's ways that you can use volumetric lighting and an object to shoot light through an object to create really beautiful light rays. And so we're going to stop this tutorial at this point, and part 2, well, I'll show you how to do that very quickly.